Hello guys, welcome back to this tutorial. So in this tutorial, we are going to discuss another interview question. The question is, what is batch apex and what are the different methods of the batch apex? So first we are going to talk about what is the batch apex. Now batch apex is used to run large jobs when you are processing millions of records or thousands of records. Let's say you are doing a data cleaning operation or archiving your records, and you have, let's say, millions of records. If you're trying to process those records in one transaction, you will definitely going to hit your governor limits, and you will never be able to process millions of records in one go. So in that case, what you do is you divide your records in the form of batches, and then you perform the logic for each of the batch. So that is what the batch apex is. So using the batch apex, you can process the records asynchronously in the batches. That's why we call it as batch apex. And each of the batch will be under the governor limit. So you will avoid hitting your governor limits, and you will be able to process those million records, which we could not have processed otherwise if you are not using batch apex. So let's say you have 1 million records that you want to process. So what you do is you divide those million records in, let's say, batches. Okay, so batch 1, batch 2, batch 3, batch 4. Like, you have millions of records and divide into batch 1, batch 2, batch 3. Okay, so and then what you do is each of the batch is going to under the governor limits, or we can say the platform limits, and then you're going to process those records, but now you are doing in the form of batches, and each batch will have some records, will have new set of records, and each batch will have their own governor limits, so they will never hit those governor limits. Now, what are the advantages of this batch epic, sorry. So first advantage is that, let's say, you are not going to hit the governor limits. That is the advantage, because every transaction starts with the new governor limits, making it easier to ensure that your code will stay in governor execution limits. The second advantage that you have is, let's say you are processing your records and you have, let's say, 5 batches. So you have batch 1, batch 2, batch 3, and batch 4, and then you have batch 5. So you have different set of records in each of these batches. And let's say one of the record failed in batch 3. That's fine, because these batches which were successful without any issue, they will not be rolled back. So you do not have to rerun the same thing again. All you have to do is, when whichever batch failed, you just have to rerun that, because others were successful. So these will not be rolled back, because each of them have their own transaction. They're not running in single runs. They have, each of them are running in their own transaction, and each transaction has their own governor limits. So you are not hitting your governor limits, and if one of the batch failed, the rest of the batches are successful, will not be rolled back. So this is another advantage of using the batch apex. Then the next interview question that we asked was, what are the different methods that are available in the batch apex? So if you want to write the batch apex class, Means if you want to process your records in the batch format or in the batchable format or in the form of batches, then you have to implement this interface called database.batchable interface. So this is the name of the interface that you have to implement. And once you implement this interface, you have three methods that you need to implement. First one is the start method, second one is the execute method, and the third one we have is the finish method. So these are the three methods that you need to implement when you implement this batchable interface. So what is the start method? The start method is going to collect the records which will be passed to this execute method. And execute method will be the method which will have all the logic. So if you are updating those records, the logic will be here. If you are archiving those records, the logic will be in the execute method. So the execute method is where the whole logic would be that you are going to perform for each batch. The start method will collect the records that we need to pass to this execute method. The start method will be called once at the beginning of the batch job, and it will return you what? It will return you either a type of this query locator object, or it will return you the iterable that contains the records or the objects that you are going to pass to your execute method. So start method will collect the records that we need to process. Once the start method will return you the records that needs to be processed. Then those records will go through the execute method, and this execute method will be performed every time a batch runs. Let's say if you have 10 batches, this execute method will be called 10 times for each of those times. The default batch size is 200 records. So every batch will have up to 200 records. The default size is 200 records. So the execute method takes in two parameters. First one is of the batchable context, and the second one is the records that are returned by the start method. And then the return type is void, so it doesn't return you anything. Then the third method that you need to implement is finish method. So let's say you wanted to send an email after all the batches are processed. Okay, so like if you want to send an email to the administrator saying that, hey, we have successfully completed all the batches and this is our status report. So that kind of content you are going to write in the finish method, and this finish method will execute only once after all the batches I have are successful. So that's when this finish method will be executed. So it will be executed post-processing operations once all the batches are processed. So it takes in one parameter of the type batchable context, and it will return you a void. So if you want to send an email, if you want to create a report, etc., all that stuff you are going to specify inside of this finish method. So start method is going to collect the records which will be passed to the execute method. Execute method will be doing all the logic that you need to do for each of the batch. It will run once for every batch. This execute method will run, and then after all the batches have successfully completed, then we have is the finish method that will get executed, and once all the batches are processed. So these are the three methods that are available in the batch apex. So if somebody asks you that, hey, if you have, let's say, millions of records, how you are going to process those millions of records without hitting the governor limits. So the answer to that question is that I'm going to use my batch apex. I am going to divide those records in multiple batches, and those batches will be in the governor limits. And if one of the batch fails, there are other batches will not be rolled back. So I am going to use batch apex, and in order to make the class batch apex, I have to implement this interface called batch apex, batchable apex. And once I implement this interface, I have these three methods that I want to implement. So this is how you are going to process large chunk of records. So in the next tutorial, we are going to do an example in which we are going to implement this interface. We are going to use all these methods and we are going to process the records. We do not have that many records in our developer edition, but still you will get a little feel of what batch apex is. How does this batch apex work? So let's meet in next tutorial. Till then, have a good day. Bye.